first thing on our agenda is
Discussion
discussion with the Conservation Commission and our town conservation agent to understand the jurisdiction and responsibilities of the Common-Con.
Yes. Thank you for coming and opening the meeting because we're on lack of a quorum currently. And thank you to all who are in attendance who aren't on various boards or part of various departments for the town of Bolton. I do encourage you to go have some cookies that I brought along with them on the table. We do have some handouts that are relevant to tonight's presentation, one of which is a printout of the slides in color. I apologize for the technical difficulties we're having. It's not all purple or purple and white as I'm sure is about to appear. As Brian stated, we are going to discuss the responsibilities and jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission and myself being the Conservation Administrator. In addition to that, though, I do want to state a disclaimer that we do have a time constraint. So the first portion of this is specific to the laws, bylaws, and regulations associated with what the Conservation Commission does and what governs what the Conservation Commission does and what I do. So we'll go through that relatively quickly because there is a lot of redundancy in it, as you'll see. But also, each one of these slides could have its own hour-long lecture on. So given the time frame, we do want to be mindful of that. I apologize for the unaligned frame here. But the background of the Conservation Commission is that the town accepted Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, which gives the opportunity to the town to create such a commission. Every town in Massachusetts has one. Not every town has a staffed conservation agent or administrator or coordinator, and their responsibilities vary from town to town, but it backs up to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C. The first appointment was on March 6, 1967, and this is the purpose of the Conservation Commission. And this is the general responsibility on a large scale of what the Conservation Commission has jurisdiction over and has the authority to govern. So Section 1 overview. Like I stated briefly before, we're going to talk about Massachusetts General Law, the Code of Massachusetts General Regulations, Code of Town of Bolton, which is our bylaws, and associated regulations that go beyond just the regulations to the bylaw, but the land rules and regulations as well. And that visual there on the right side, they're overlapped because one does pertain to another. If you think of them as three boxes, because I'm a visual person, Massachusetts General Law is the big box at the end of the row, Conservation Commission is at the end, and they all stack nicely into one another. They all correlate with one another, and that basically explains the redundancy that you'll see through the following slides. So the purpose, I'm not going to read this slide, but in summary, the purpose explains the protection of the interests. These include various resources, not specific to wetlands yet, but we're talking about what the protection of wetlands goes beyond and protects in terms of whether it be wildlife habitat or public and private water supply. And here in the town of Bolton, we only have private water supply and private septic systems. Sometimes shared, but they're still considered private. Jurisdiction, just a little discretion on that. The jurisdiction, for those who don't know that vocabulary, is it defines the governing authority of these regulations and Massachusetts general law. So that is basically stating what the commission can and cannot do. And the purpose is obviously why we're doing these things. We have a bylaw here in town, the most recent, a wetlands bylaw. The most recent update was done in February of 2013. Updates to the bylaw have to go through town meeting, and they have to be voted on by the town itself. So these are decisions, and I stress the town as an entity that's providing us with these responsibilities. It's not just the commission, it's not just me as an agent or an administrator. And again, the purpose is similar to that of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, but it goes beyond that in that it also covers recreation deemed important to the community, agriculture, aquaculture, and adjoining land areas, in addition to rare species habitat, including rare plant species. So that's the last few items in that paragraph under purpose, and that's where it differs and gets a little bit more specific. And then some examples of those natural resource services that are protected under our local bylaw. Our bylaw jurisdiction, again, what the commission has the responsibility to do, enforce, and be sure that residents and community members are coming into compliance with. Again, this is, not allowing anyone to alter resource areas. This does include wetlands. The Code of Massachusetts regulations, also the Wetlands Protection Act, which was in one of the previous slides, also touched upon wetlands. Something specific to the town of Bolton, we have a 25-foot no disturb area or prohibition area. Again, that's more specific than the Wetlands Protection Act, and it doesn't allow anything to be done, anything to be altered, as described in the first part of this paragraph, within that 25 feet. So for instance, if this table is the edge of the wetland, that's done during a delineation process, 25 feet out, you don't touch it, you don't do anything to it. And that's addressed during the permitting process. We also have adjacent upland resource areas, which under the Wetlands Bylaw, under the Wetlands Protection Act, is a protected resource area, but some development is allowed, and it's considered a 100-foot buffer. Under our local regulations, the adjacent upland resource area, it's a distinct resource area that's protected just like a wetland would be. And then just establishing, again, that correlation and relationship with the state's Wetlands Protection Act, that overlap that is displayed in one of the first two slides, and the purpose to just define those standards and definitions and procedures that we are required to follow from the day-to-day dealings of the Conservation Commission and myself in the Conservation Office in Town Hall. Protecting specified interests, I separated this just to show that we specifically in Bolton include a no net loss of functions and a no net loss of resource area under our local bylaw. So it's difficult and it's a little bit more stringent than other towns. It's certainly more stringent than the Wetlands Protection Act in that you really have to prove to the commission that it's not going to alter those resource areas to the extent that you're either mitigating or you're restoring or remediating any impact to resource areas. And again, listing the protected interests inclusive of recreation. So the past couple of slides and this slide are exact excerpts and copies from our bylaw and Massachusetts General Law. So again, this isn't a summary up on the screen, this is actually what it states. And I want to stress that because again, it includes passive recreation, adjoining resource areas, agriculture, and aquaculture. Going over a jurisdiction, a lot of redundancy in this, but it just overlays, our bylaw overlays the Wetlands Protection Act in that any gray areas or areas that may be seen as not solid arguments in the Wetlands Protection Act as we're developing our findings for various permits. This allows us to be covered and to consider things within the town of Bolton that may or may not be considered in a city or another type of environment in another town. We also have, I briefly touched upon, the land rules and regulations. This governs what is allowed and what is not allowed on our conservation property, which will get into the amount of property that we own and maintain here in the town of Bolton. And this is land owned outright by the town, but managed and maintained by the Conservation Commission, and that authority is given to us through, again, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, which you will probably have memorized by the end of this. And this, again, these rules and regulations are actually created during the public meeting process of the Conservation Commission, so these don't have to go to town meeting. And there's a full copy of these on the table over there if you're interested in specific items on that. We also, since I've been here, have created rules and regulations associated with dogs on conservation land. My first few months in the town of Fulham, working as the conservation administrator, I had many calls, specifically on one of our most used properties, about dog issues, aggressive dogs, or just people having conflicting ideas of how to use the property, what to use the property for. Again, bottom line, every property owned, managed, and maintained by the town under the Conservation Commission backs up to the promotion of natural resources and watershed resources, as you saw in one of the first slides. But these rules and regulations clarify that what's respectful and responsible, so that the expectations of the governing authority, being the Conservation Commission on behalf of the town, are respected, and it allows that transparency to be more widely understood and observed, instead of just one individual standing there saying this is the right thing to do. We post both the land rules and regulations and the dogs and conservation land at each of our properties, so that it's clear, and if anyone has a question, they can refer back to it. It's also posted on our local website, on the town website, and our Trails Committee website. I know that was a ton of information I just ran through that was regulatory and law specific, but I was wondering if you had any questions just about that portion. And we are going to get into some of the land. Yes?
I had a couple that were kind of interrelated.
Sure.
My understanding is that there's about 50 towns in the Commonwealth that are like us and have private water and septic.
Correct.
So when you were talking about like Bolton's special bylaws, were those generated partially in response to the fact that we are on private waters? Like, how does that affect the bylaws that we've accepted, and like the way you guys pursue your mission? Is a lot of what you're doing trying to protect private water supplies, and is it different if you live in a town that has a public water supply?
It differs in the sense that the watershed as a whole is different, and I'll show you, there's a good visual in a couple of slides. And I don't mean to be so general about that, but when it comes to every single well in the town of Bolton, we can't specify that we have the best water in the whole Commonwealth, because each well has different variables that go into it. Go into testing the clarity and the quality of that water. When it comes to our surface water anyways, that's 100% considered when we're updating bylaws or considering updates to the regulations associated with those bylaws, because it's just ensuring that our watershed's maintained in a specific manner, that it's not adversely impacting those resource areas, which would include the private wells and ponds and streams and other systems as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do any of the state regulations differentiate between towns that have public municipal water supplies and private?
Not under the Wetlands Protection Act or Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, or the Code of Massachusetts Regulations to the Wetlands Protection Act, which is 310 CMR 10.
But for a town that's municipal water supply, that supplies its own water from town wells,
Yep.
they just set their own bylaws. The state doesn't define anything besides here's a well, a public water supply, and here's the radius you can't disturb or something.
Under the Board of Health, there may be regulations on a local level or on a state level that
But
define
not
it.
in conservation.
No,
Okay.
not through the Wetlands Protection Act. So a good clarification point too, we don't have jurisdiction over we meaning the local conservation commission, DEP certainly does, we don't have jurisdiction over the water itself until there's an adverse impact that affects that waterway. So, or there's something that's released into the waterway that could negatively impact it, that's when we get involved. This is for resources that are adjacent to waters, but inclusive of wetlands. So wetlands aren't always surface water, but some of the time it can be. And also, just so people know the definition of a wetland, you have to have hydric soils, you have to have the appropriate contributing hydrology, and you have to have the hydric vegetation, so hydrophytes. If you don't have all three, it's not considered a wetland. But that's why our bylaw goes above and beyond that and says adjacent upland resource areas don't have wetland characteristics, but they're still considered a resource area in the town of Fulton. Or vernal pools, for instance, I know that question comes up a lot as well. That is a protected resource area in the town of Fulton, whether it's a potential vernal pool, a certified vernal pool, and going beyond that, we have bordering land subject to flooding, but we also have protected groundwater, and then in addition to that, isolated areas that are subject to flooding, where under the Wetlands Protection Act, isolated land subject to flooding, unless it meets a specific qualification, it's not jurisdictional. Any other questions? Yes.
The 25-foot buffer is
Yes.
very clear. You
Yep.
can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little confused about the 100-foot buffer.
So, and I don't mean to correct you, I need to do it respectfully, but so it's not a buffer, it's a resource area. And it's important to make that distinction because of under the Wetlands Protection Act, it's a buffer, you're allowed some leeway there. But under a local bylaw, it's a resource area, so it's protected a little bit more stringently than that. Our 100-foot adjacent upland resource area is, I don't have the quotes exactly, but I would be happy to go through that with you. But in general, it again goes back to the no net loss of function. So there's specific functions laid out in our bylaw that are required, and if those can be met, we can permit things. If there's a loss of that resource area, or if there's a loss of the function that it provides in protecting a resource, providing habitat, then the commission is not allowed to permit that based on our bylaw. But again, that's up to them to make that deliberation during the public hearing process. Anything else about jurisdictional laws or regulations? Okay. Really quick, who knows what kind of turtle this is? It's local. Yes.
Is it the landings?
Yes, it is a landings turtle. So that's a fun part of my job. It's Monday mornings. Sometimes I get excellent wildlife photos, and it just starts your week off right. So Town of Bolton acting, the reason why I put that as the title is, again, the Town of Bolton owns the conservation properties. The Conservation Commission manages and maintains them. We own and we manage and maintain, we being the Conservation Commission, about 2,000 acres. And in addition to that, we have 585 acres of land that's protected under formal restrictions, inclusive of agricultural preservation restrictions and conservation restrictions. And obviously the difference between the two is one is specific to agriculture, one is not. But a conservation restriction can still consider agricultural uses. The Bolton Conservation Trust land I also included on the slide because we typically assist in managing or monitoring their properties as well. So that's an additional 300 acres. This is not inclusive of all open space in town. This is not inclusive of lands in current use programs. So chapter land that's currently in programs such as forestry, recreation, or agriculture. Again, they're not permanently protected, but they're basically slotted in for a good 5 to 10 years, depending on what program it is, to be under that use. So we have some time before we're worried about development or things like that. Additionally, we have state property. We have 2 wildlife management areas in the town of Bolton, which I apologize, you can't really see that. But this is Bolton's Lats, and then over here, which you can't really see, is Delaney over on the Stowe side. This is also a map that was updated during our open space and recreation plan updates. So it is not conclusive of the land that we've acquired through phosphor development. We most of the time acquire land because as they provide cluster developments, we end up getting deeded the land, we being the Conservation Commission or the town, end up being deeded a swath of land surrounding the development itself. Obviously, we have quite a bit of land we maintain. So how do we do that? What governs it? What are the standards? This is all going back to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8G, and the promotion of natural resources and the promotion of the watershed resources. Each property has different management standards. I don't know what that is. Beyond that of the general reflection, the general purpose of what governs the Conservation Commission, they differ where one may have a conservation restriction, one may have an agricultural preservation restriction, and those documents specifically define, after sitting down and working with the landowner, what can and can't be done, and that runs with the life of the land in perpetuity, so permanently on the property. I'm going to give 2 examples of active management that we take on the property, one of which is Bower Springs. The image here is one of the management strategies, which is managed succession. This plan was developed by a landscape architecture school, and it was contracted out from the Conservation Commission, and it was finalized in 2005. Between when that was done and when I came to the town of Bolton in the position I am in now, that plan had sort of been dropped off. So right now we're playing catch up with making sure the fields don't have woody vegetation in them, getting the fields back on the edges, so removing everything that's growing into the trees. But this is the work that we end up contracting out because it's governed by the management plan that was established with the Conservation Commission and this contracted party many years ago, or a few years ago. I don't stretch it that far. Another example is no management at all. So we monitor one property which was gifted to the town as a wildlife sanctuary. Specifically, it does not allow public access, and we only have one of those properties in town. And it is important and it's valuable for habitat and also watershed management, just to ensure that we do have these large tracts of land that will be protected in perpetuity. But again, we don't do anything. So those are really 2 opposites of the spectrum of how we manage and maintain our properties. Also, since I've been here, I've been creating and drafting management plans for the various properties pertaining to invasive species, pertaining to trail maintenance, pertaining to new trails, but with some assistance from our regular volunteers, which I'll discuss in one of the upcoming slides as well. And these plans, once I feel that they're finalized enough, I either bring them to the commission under the presumption of, or the contingency of receiving a grant, which we've done in the past. We've received some, and some we haven't received. Or some of them are still actually in the workings because we have properties that have had timber harvest in the past, but it's not, the forest isn't to the point where we necessarily want to do it again yet. So it's just deciding that time frame as well and what's necessary and what's not. Properties acquired through town meetings. A few disclaimers on this slide, one of which, these are during town meetings, not things that have been gifted to the town that we've brought only to the Board of Selectmen and it's been accepted in that way. However, this is how land has been acquired from 1972 until 2013. And now 2013 was the last time that the town actually acquired a conservation property. We have the acreage up there during specific time frames, the monetary value that it was purchased for, but I do want to stress that these are the totals during that time frame. This is also not specific to breaking it down to show what was borrowed, what was transferred, what was taken from the conservation fund, and then most importantly, what was reimbursed through grant. Because most of the time, these were acquired at special town meeting, not annual town meeting. And that just shows the importance of getting up ahead of these and being proactive and being mindful of tracts of land that we may or may not want to conserve in the future. Because as these come up, annual town meeting, oh, no land's for sale, the property owner doesn't want to sell it or gift it or conserve it at this time. By like November, it's getting into the end of busy year for projects, and someone says, oh, I'm not doing anything with this land now, I want to gift it to the town, or maybe I want to take them up on their offer. We've talked about a purchase and sales agreement in the past, or an agreement in the past, rather. Now it goes special town meeting, everyone's rushing last minute, and this is what it results in. Since I've been here, we've tried to be proactive on things, such as updating the open space and recreation plan to ensure that we have goals set in the areas and expectations are clear versus last minute, oh, this looks like a good parcel. Which there is significant planning and due diligence that goes into the purchase of each property that the town has acquired. And I don't want to downplay that, but I do want to establish the fact that these are things that, no, we don't have, $75,000 sitting in a pot somewhere, but we do have some funds for various purposes that are related to acquisition of land. Does anybody have questions on that slide before I move on?
Do you have
Yes.
a minimum acreage that you would consider, or are you open to anything? Because those are big pieces of land, right?
Relatively, so these are the totals of land. Some were small pieces, some were sort of puzzle pieces that we're adjacent to our larger conservation properties already. The open space and recreation plan, which I'll talk about in a few slides, which I have here if you want to thumb through it, that really talks about why we're looking to acquire land and what types of land we're looking to acquire, but it's not really limited by maximum or minimum acreage. Does that answer your question? Anybody else on this slide? The importance of open space. Ooh, I apologize. I didn't mean to leave that line in there. But I meant to fill in that with how many acres of wetland resource areas we have. I don't have that number, unfortunately, but needless to say, we can see it through the amount of wetland permitting we have, wetland permits we have. We have quite a bit of wetland resource areas. And that just follows the topography of the town and the landscape of the town as it exists naturally. I won't read through all of this again, but in summary, there is a benefit of open space just for wildlife and human populations, in addition to providing a contiguous habitat, or even sometimes fragmented, because various species like one or the other. But the importance of open space also comes into play when you have a large development going or a lot of development happening throughout town. You are fragmenting a contiguous or what once was a contiguous habitat, and now you see deer munching on the bushes out front of your house or your foundation plants. You might see more of one species that you hadn't seen before. And that's not the only reason why that's happening, but that certainly does play into it. So these large contiguous parcels, or even just open space at the corner of your neighborhood, is beneficial so that they have a place to go. In addition to recreational opportunities and allowing the rural character of the town to succeed development. Bill, you can come in and sit down. Benefits of open space to the built environment. This was a question that was given to me as well. And this is something each one of those items could have a half-hour lecture on. So I won't go into each individual one again, but it does help for reduced energy use, for example. Hi.
Sign keyboard. Is that here or is that?
Town hall.
Thank you.
Sorry. One example is reduced energy use through windbreaks or shading from open space or having trees on your property or vegetation on your property. The reduced energy use comes from the basically insulation that it provides, whether it be if it was bare, you would have a windy slope and that's blown into your house, or something as simple as carbon sequestration and carbon storage. And this is a huge value that wetlands provide, along with many other values. It also increases your property value and supports defensible space. I do want to touch upon defensible space because it's something that not everyone thinks about, and honestly not everyone cares about, and that's just a stronger connection to place and building community, but also just feeling comfortable and feeling protective of what you have, whether it be a public property or your own parcel of land. Any questions on this? Grant opportunities. So back to the funding. I've split this slide into basically the larger grant opportunities that have been applied to or have been successfully received in terms of funding from those grants, and then the smaller grants as well under those same categories. The bolded titles of the programs are the ones that the town has received. The land grant at the top was received by both the town of Harvard and Bolton during a collaborative effort to acquire the Bower Springs property, for instance. I also included the TerraCorps hosted by Sudbury Valley trustees because although that's not a monetary amount that you're being reimbursed or given, they're basically providing, they are providing staff hours, time, and effort for a larger workshop series that we had held throughout the course of the year. We had 4 workshops, or this will be our 4th, on October 19th, talking about land management, land maintenance, leaving a land legacy, so talking about those conservation restrictions, the chapter, current use programs, and the agricultural preservation restriction programs. Again, what can you do with your land to either preserve it yourself, or how can the town assist you in guiding you that way to ensure that it's not a last-minute decision, or your loved ones aren't left with a mess of a problem, unfortunately, which does happen a lot. Any questions on this about grants? Open space and recreation plan. Promised you would talk about this briefly. One correction I do want to make is it was finalized officially in 2018, but the updates were done and submitted during 2017, and we just had to go back and make a few other edits, and then it was approved for 7 years. So we can apply to those land and park grants now. In addition to that, it creates a to-do list within the action plan section, which is at the back of the open space and recreation plan. It also is in a lovely table format, so it lists the responsibilities in terms of collaboration with other boards, in addition to where we expect to get funding from. It does not necessarily establish a financial commitment in exact amounts, but what it does, we wrote it in a specific manner that would be contingent upon grants, personnel, volunteer efforts. Each item's different, but we at least have one project per year that we need to accomplish per this plan. Lastly, the last thing I want to mention about the open space and recreation plan is we included a lot more visuals than other towns typically do, because the group that we worked with to create this plan really wanted it to be something you keep on your coffee table, as strange as that sounds, or something if you want to look it up online. It's not just the statistics and information. It provides some nice visuals, so it's a little bit easier and more user-friendly to get through. And we do encourage you to read through that because that explains not only the purpose of the Conservation Commission, but also the reason why we protect these lands, why it's important to protect these various habitats, the amount of land we have, and it has a bunch of good maps that establish those resource areas. Again, very easy to visualize and understand as you go through it.
And you said it's good for 7 years,
Yes.
so through 2025, 7 years from 18 or 17.
Yep. And 2017, as you can see on the cover of our lovely open space and recreation plan, was celebrating 50 years of conservation and recreation efforts in the town of Bolton. Another favorite question we always have is, what is the conservation fund? What can and what are you limited in terms of using the conservation fund? Again, this backs up to our favorite Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 8C, which establishes the use of the fund. In addition to that, just like the bylaw, our local regulations and our local conservation commission is able to limit that use through public meeting and public hearing process. So in February 18, 2014, there was a motion made to limit the use of the conservation fund only for land preservation acquisition projects and the due diligence associated with them. It was voted unanimously, and that has stood in place as the limiting factor of the conservation fund into the future, and that's what we have now. Are there any questions about that?
Is that an issue? That it's limiting like that?
I don't see it as an issue.
Okay, and how much is in the conservation fund?
Currently, we have just about or just over $30,000. Something important to note, and I forgot to mention it, thank you for asking that question, because it sparked a thought. During that timeline, I meant to mention that each time something was expended from the conservation fund, it was actually not reimbursed the full amount, but it was reimbursed during that same town meeting. So something was put back in. And that was anywhere from under $5,000 to most of the time $5,000 or more. So that's important to note as well, because although we have this little pot waiting for a great acquisition project, it's used and then reimbursed or fulfilled with some amount, or excuse me, replaced with some amount. Speaking of the conservation fund, a wonderful use of these funds would be for due diligence for our project going on right now, which is the Taggart property. The town is looking into acquire the Taggart property off of Four Bush Mill Road, and currently we are collaborating with the Bolton Conservation Trust on that matter. They have a relationship from 2005 with the homeowner, or the property owner rather. So they're continuing those conversations and then updating us as they go. And right now they're still within the fact-finding and planning stages of that. But that's something you can expect to see within the next coming months.
How large is that parcel?
It is 46 acres, or over 43. I know it says on the sign 43, but I believe it's more. And that's a good example also of what parcels we look at, because not only was it looked at in the past and wanting to be acquired by the town through the commission and local citizens, but also it's contiguous with other parcels that we already maintain and manage. Again, back to the finances and leveraging low-cost labor. And I'm careful the way I'm saying this, because in terms of our volunteers, at the end of the day, yes, it is leveraging low-cost labor, and I'll get into the statistics there and the actual numbers, but we have this awesome group of volunteers who are regular volunteers, about 10 that meet regularly, are out on the trails helping monitor, remove down trees so that our trails stay open. One of my favorite experiences is during one of the bad March storms where we had been basically plastered with snow. I'm getting calls from other conservation coordinators, conservation administrators, agents saying, what are you doing to close your trails? What do we do? You know, we can't simply get out there. We're only one person, sometimes two people in the office. I'm sitting there saying, I've been out. Trails committee's been out. It's all taken care of. We don't need to hire anyone to come in to work on that because it's been done. And we were able to keep our trails open through their efforts, which I can't thank them enough because it's such an invaluable resource that we have. They also are updating their trail maps on their website, which correlates to us, me being the Conservation Commission in the town, because they're a volunteer group. They're not a formal group associated with the town or the trust, and that makes it more fun and allows them to be more enthusiastic because they're not required to be there, but they choose to be there. That makes it feel better for me too, because I like working with people who are in a good mood. Last fiscal year, we had at least 346 hours, and I apologize because I am going to directly read this, not that I haven't in the past, between about 8 people, volunteers, that reported what times and tracked the time that they put into the trails and land maintenance. So looking at the state estimated value of volunteer non-skill specific, and I'm stressing that for a reason I'll get to in a minute, for the hours during the years 2018-2019 was just over $23 per hour. So doing that small math problem, you have just under $8,000 of volunteer time received that the town didn't pay out. In addition to that, the reason why I stress non-skill specific is because we have individuals who created that kiosk above from some of the cedar trees on our property. So taking the resources that are already there, they're not going out buying other resources. We have carpenters, we have engineers, we have arborists, horticulturists, among other things, and they all bring their expertise, whether it be through the volunteer work or even just providing some outreach information or their time. So that's how we leverage low-cost labor, if you want to call it that. And then that's just a picture of some of our volunteers as well. They also coordinate work days. Our next work day is October 19th and 20th over at Bauer Springs. Again, just maintaining the properties that they regularly use, but also working in correlation with myself and the Conservation Commission to make sure that they're doing the work within what governs what the Commission can and can't do. In containing costs, so when we do have to expend funds from the town and obviously the Conservation Commission budget, we ask for at least 3 entities per project. We ask for 3 quotes or estimates from different entities per project. So we're not required to do that if it's under certain amounts. For instance, $4,000, which was accepted by the town for contracted work or merchandise. There's also a threshold standard that is anything under $10,000, which we also regularly meet. But when you hit that threshold, you are required to go out for those 3 quotes and estimates, which we're doing anyways. So one of the things that we do contract out was the repair work to the Five Shire Dam entryway, which was the repointing of the stone structure, and also the mowing of Butternut and Bauer Springs, our 2 field properties. Again, that's because of we're catching up from 2005 and trying to maintain trying to follow the plan in that management plan that was established. But we're getting closer to it, so there's not as much woody vegetation, so at that point, we'll be looking for either a farmer to come hay, if that's more economic or even more beneficial for the town, or just simply to mow it. Did anybody have questions on that side? The difference between the Conservation Trust and the Conservation Commission. Yes, they are 2 separate entities. I tried to get some information from the Conservation Trust on sort of their side of the story, but I was unable to get that information in time, unfortunately. So, in general, one is a town entity governed by Massachusetts general law, one is a 501c3 land trust, one is private, one is public, one has a board of directors, and one has a 7-member board of volunteers and a conservation administrator. We do collaborate on the various items in the middle, along with trail mapping, but I wanted to include that little circle there that says BTC, which is the Bolton Trails Committee, because they assist with all of that as well. Questions on that? No. Swamped in the office. So briefly, what tools and skills I use day to day, week to week. I wouldn't go as far as separating it from month to month because these are things I literally use every day. I do land and deed research using our software that we have for permitting, our new online permitting software, maintaining the conservation website, wayfinding, and going out and monitoring the properties, boundary marking, using GPS, using the online state required wetland permitting platform, and then of course our GIS mapping and layer manipulation, which is something I like but get frustrated at the same time. And I mean, some items there, it's not limited to that. Some are a little bit more expanded than others, but in general, this is what I do and use day to day. And of course, wetland permitting. We have regional and local responsibilities, which are established there. I'll read through them all. But basically, we have entities and we're members of various entities such as Municipal Society of Conservation Professionals, Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, that all collaborate on similar items, and whether it be management, recreation, stewardship, outreach. All of these items here are things that other towns in Massachusetts collaborate on. Watershed management. We are part of 2 watersheds, which you can see here in the small map there that's not showing up well. This dark blue line is the separation point. So we are part of the Nashua and the Siwasco watersheds. This means that when there is a push for invasive species management within that watershed, we are also going to encourage the control of invasive species, or the invasive species management itself, along with land acquisition if there's necessary parcels to protect that the entire watershed sees as important. We try and match those goals as well. Most recently, being part of the Nashua watershed, we are part of the National Wild and Scenic Designated Rivers, which is the Nashua. There's only a small portion that runs through the town of Fulton, but it still means that we're part of the watershed, so we still have a responsibility over that river as well. And this is the watershed image that I was talking about. This is taken from the DEP website, just to give you a visual about how it's important to protect these natural resources through wetland permitting or open space, because it doesn't run in one direction. It's driven by the topography, it's driven by various things along the landscape, and it's good to preserve those areas, whether it be for recharge, infiltration specifically, or even just the flow over the landscape to make sure you're not getting pollutants or anything dragged into the rivers or your private systems. Passive recreation. I won't read through the list, but we do maintain the trails. These are actions we take to encourage passive recreation and to ensure that people are using our conservation properties and can use them. We have Boy Scouts that come and maintain the properties or build new trails on our properties through their Eagle Scout requirements, and we can't think of them enough because that's another pool of volunteers that we are very thankful for. And we like to encourage younger generations to get involved with land management and stewardship as well. Outreach. We partner and collaborate with various entities and organizations, including the Bolton Public Library, which we partner with for Earth Day, World Water Day, and then we also give guided trail walks once a month through Bolton Conservation Properties. And I encourage you to attend one, because they're very informal. Sometimes we have someone talking about wild edible plants we've done, or just wildflowers that are in season that we have. And we also encourage you to suggest subject matter for those walks. how we preserve natural resources. Much of this we've already gone over. But again, wetland permitting, wetland delineations, habitat assessments, land acquisition, and then updating management plans for conservation land as the goals change with various commission members or the town's goals through the open space and recreation plan. Okay. I was asked, is there any homework should you do to better understand your role in the town? My first thought was just get out there. Do you see an out there meaning in the open space, whether it be on the trails, whether it be walking along Still River or kayaking through Still River, which you can do. Some people don't realize that. Just get out there, experience it. Is there any polluted water? Do you smell anything strange? One of the great things that we have is that nice barrier because of the open space from 495. For instance, if you walk in the trailhead that's off of Old Sugar Road at the cul-de-sac, you hear so much noise from 495. As you get into the property, it's still right there next to you, but you hear none of it. And that's something just showing the importance of open space beyond, I guess, the ecological and environmental services that it provides. In addition to that, though, after thinking a little bit deeper and thinking, okay, maybe not everyone's going to get out in the open space. Homework. Look up the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2020 for Massachusetts. That establishes goals for the entire state and what's expected. And that boils down to what the town should also have equivalent goals to contribute to that plan as well. The IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, that also provides some great information on adaptation and resiliency. Read through the Open Space and Recreation Plan. We created this awesome document for all town residents and community members, even extended beyond that, to read, print out, throw it on your coffee table, read it during breakfast, dinner, when you're out in the conservation property, even better, and just read through what resources are here in your town, just to know what you're living with and what your taxes pay for to a certain extent. You should know that. There's another good flyer over there as well on the physical impacts of open space and comparatively throughout various towns, if you're interested. Also, because this is sort of a hit topic right now, research how well-functioning vernal pools control mosquito levels naturally. So if it's a balanced, nice ecosystem in your vernal pool, that helps. So, that is your homework. Are there any questions? I know we've run a little long.
Thank you for your time. I know you have a meeting tonight, so.
Yes. Thank you for coming and requesting this. I think it's important not only to be available via video, but I think it's important for advisory, along with other departments, to just understand a little bit about what each department does and where it overlaps or where it may not overlap.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Close the meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
We're official meeting, yeah.
What time is it?
Now we do, but
7:25. Motion to adjourn.
I shall move. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
You guys are welcome to stay for the meeting if you're interested in seeing how we actually
we
work.
have cookies.
I'm gonna stick around for a little bit.
Stick around.
I was on the board, we usually meet until 1 in the morning.
Yeah, we
No.
don't do that. No,
Huh?
no.
Nice going.
All right.
Sure.
Go. Oh, that's fine. Hit the black. No. Go back.
That one? No, there. That was easier. So I guess the fishing isn't very good these days, huh?
Oh, it's been very good.
Very spongy cakey.
It's been very
Did you
good.
see the picture of the swimmer at Nauset?
No.
He was out there on a surfboard, Some guy was taking pictures and there was a great white between
Oh.
him and the beach.
I did see
It
that.
looked like, oh my God.
He was
And he looked at it like, please.
wrong timing on that one.
Yes.
Yeah. Black sea bass have been very prolific. Yeah, very good.
Coming back.
Yeah, for him.
So, is that available now?
I didn't realize it was.
I never realized it was either.
The back wetland
Yes,
buffers are
that
back.
is available for you to review the town hall,
To review.
to review.
This thing, this
And
is
borrow
the,
if
this
you
is
bring it back.
Squanicook and Neshoba.
Yes.
That or we're going through.
That is the wildlands new stewardship plan.
Thank you, Thank you, ma'am.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Is that city town hall? Did you know there was a landing turtle, by the way?
It's the one protected turtle we have here in town. I was looking at percentages and it didn't look like a snapping turtle.
No, certainly wasn't a
Yeah,
landing.
so,
They-
no, but who knows?
So you're at the center today?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not.
Who let Bill get into it? Oh, I'll come down this end.
I'm messing with it.
Oh.
This is all messed up because you should be over here. Denver.
I'm not being chair.
Please
It's all right.
review.
Someone say electric chair. No. All right. I'd like to officially call to order the Tuesday, October 1st, 2019 meeting of the Bolton Conservation Commission. As always, we will start with a roll call. I'm Brian Barabee.
I'm Jeffrey Bryan.
Kit McNamara. Bill Payne.
Rebecca Longbaugh.
First up this evening. We don't have our regular sheets, do we? All right.
Actually.
Mass General Law, Chapter 233. As long as I get my Mass General
Yeah,
Law,
that's
Chapter,
right.
that works, yeah.
No, that's the first.
Okay. Oh, it is. All right. The Bolton Conservation Commission will now hold a public hearing under the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, and under the Bolton Wetland Bylaw, Chapter 233, to consider a request for determination of applicability for 269 Harvard Road, proposed in-law apartment addition on existing single-family home. The public meeting to begin this evening. How are you?
Good evening.
So far.
Nice presentation.
Thank you.
So, I think most of you have been able to visit the site and were able to witness the driveway that was on the north side of the property, which separates the wetlands to the north and the proposed project.
Yeah.
And I did discuss with the homeowner what they'd like to do as far as a stone perimeter drain and or collecting it in gutters and putting it into a dry well. I told them that those two items were brought up in discussion and would probably be discussed tonight to find out what the wishes of the board and if there was an option to do either or. It's kind of open for discussion.
Yeah. Sure. Do you want to roll it out?
Yeah. I don't have.
Yeah, it's
Larry,
perfect. Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine.
Okay.
So
it is a single shed roof.
Yep.
To the east. There's a gable roof here to the north and the south. So there's plenty of room to install a dry well. Perk rates up there, if I recall, I think are under 6 or 7 minutes per inch. It's all bony gravel. In fact, I think there's an necessary because I didn't bring my glasses, but there's perk rates here for the septic system. That, so, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 4 and 2. Thank you.
Did everybody get out to this one?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did,
I did.
yeah. I was glad to see there wasn't a perennial stream running where I thought the drive.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's just a total trick of the eyes how that gets hidden.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two questions. Basically, the two things that I saw was just because it's going over existing lawn. The entire project is over existing lawn right now. You can see like the existing driveway comes in. Basically, it's almost extending it out and kind of across. Those would be the two things I'd not worry about, but think about is some sort of erosion controls between, you know, on that. Going towards the wetland on that side. I know it's not a huge slope off, but just during construction.
Yeah.
Stockpiling of materials, the materials coming in, say stockpile on the existing driveway, or I was going to say it's going to be difficult. Usually we try to keep the stockpile out of the buffer zone.
The stockpile, anything that we're going to be putting back into the foundation will remain adjacent to it.
Yeah.
Any overburden, there's a downward slope off the rear of the barn that they want me to grade off and level off. So I would need to put some erosion control in around this area here, and I would suggest from the corner of the barn up to the driveway area, which is the top
where everything's going to start, right?
And you just would need to make a preference if it's a straw wattle or hay and salt. Or I'm trying to think of strong water.
Stroke, yeah, me too.
That's usually the basic, and it's easy enough. If it would be strong enough, I'd be curious to hear. I'll bug Rebecca for her opinion in a minute. Which way she would think. As far as the drainage off the house, like I said, I think either whatever they want to go with is fine. It's basically just something that's going to prevent a lot of erosion coming off the back of that and forming any kind of gully or any kind of erosion down towards it. Which again, looking at the perk rates, it should not be a problem. But again, if it's got to a certain place, or if they just do a dry well around it, that should definitely.
My discussions with them was actually a combination of both. The grade is going to be relatively high up on the foundation in this particular area. So my suggestion was to put a gutter up and some downspouts, and we could collect it into a dry well. But over on the north side of the garage, I suggested just a stone drip line, maybe out 1.5 feet, which would catch, the soffit's only 10 inches.
Yeah.
So 1.5 feet should be sufficient enough to catch any rain runoff, if that's the route they chose, as opposed to collecting that and pulling it back. And that would then just recharge right into the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't speak for anybody else, but I would think either one of those would be fine in that area, just to see. Okay. Other questions?
Foundation's high enough over there, so any splashback isn't going to be detriment to the building.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be cutting in really. Rebecca, thoughts, questions?
Just two. One of which is you were talking about the slope of potential stockpiling material toward the rear of the barn.
Yeah, that would be loamed and seeded right after it was placed.
Okay, but that's not shown on the plans here.
It's nothing really is relative to the work, but the barn is right here, and it's quite a depression back there.
Okay, is that something you could provide updated plans for, and then include the drainage that ended up being decided upon, and then the dry well, so that we can the commission can reference that within their determination, versus just talking about the plan that's before us now, and it's not really
Okay.
I'm not concrete, but it's, you're talking about areas that aren't relayed or the work does not relate on the plans currently.
It's
So
just,
this is the back of the barn.
I was gonna say, is the
Right.
back end of the barn is in the buffer zone, right?
Right.
Is it still?
Yeah, it's still within
It's
that
kind of-
maintained area.
yeah, I mean, this is probably the area that would be stripped and filled in.
Yeah. Generally, we avoid doing that though in a buffer zone, any kind of stripping. I understand that barn is dilapidated. I mean, it's gotta come out or go down. I'm just not sure about how much I mean, I know people have flat lawns, but it's not always ideal. And that's not really lawn back there, right? That's all just vegetated now.
It's
That's all barn.
overgrown, and their idea is to have access directly from the rear of the barn for their animals to go out
Yeah.
and graze.
It's and again, it might be fine, but I think Rebecca's got a good point. That's really got to be kind of stated what's going on behind that barn, especially with any kind of filling or dredging or taking out. It's generally not something we do. I mean, if it's removing the barn, sure. If it's terraforming, it's usually avoided in the buffer zones.
Yeah, once
Since
it's
I've
over
been here, unless it's
maintained area, but you still have to keep it, you'd be bringing back the same thing that was there previously. So in general though, I don't have an issue with the addition because it's over maintained area and maintained lawn. I don't have an issue with the drainage. And I don't think there is an issue with the drainage because it's beneficial to just be containing it right there. My only question is the barn and then just making sure that those details get, whether it be a supplement to the plans, but established so that we can reference it.
Okay.
any questions from the audience on this particular? Other thoughts on the board?
So just to review, the only thing we're worried about is what's going on here.
Yeah,
That wasn't
to
brought
see
up.
that actually get spelled
That
out.
actually wasn't brought up in any of the meetings that we've had, even
I know
even when we were back. I didn't mean to be rude or but it wasn't brought up when we were there looking at it.
I
Right.
thought I brought it up.
Well,
One of our discussions.
I was gonna say, we were the night when there, and it might have been
You were
about
at the
removing
night
the
one.
barn.
Yeah.
I don't
So
remember.
they want to take down the barn potentially and either rebuild it or reconstruct
Yeah.
it somehow.
Yeah. Cause,
Well, I don't remember when Rebecca and I were there. I don't remember that part of the
But-
conversation.
so
But
I
that's
think-
okay.
I think the detail that I'm talking about that would be necessary, I think, for it to just be a wholesome project, would be just establishing what's being done there in what area, because the removal of the barn and the rebuilding of a barn is allowed within the same footprint, like I mentioned to you before, but where you're expanding upon the area that you're altering or that was altered, because it's grown in now at this point, it would be something that the commission would really like to have spelled out.
more, so
So that can be done.
describe it just in a
Yep.
letter form.
It can be, I mean, again, this is just my suggestion, but it's up to the commission to authorize or to accept that or not. It can be in a narrative and then just included on the plans as well,
Okay.
or it can be within the construction notes that are on the plans themselves.
I can do a narrative and have it on your desk tomorrow. And a copy of this describing.
That would be perfect. Does this show buffer zone offsets? Because that's the one thing I don't know if we're missing on a map, but usually we'll see where exactly it cuts away.
The septic plan does, but it's not really accurate.
Gotcha.
Our path is now the driveway.
So
Gotcha. So
the road is
Right.
here. The Harvard Road is
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
And I believe this is the wetland that they lined and established.
Yeah, what they would have said was the border.
Which they have shown coming in like this, which it obviously doesn't because the driveways
Yeah.
running through there.
Yeah.
And
The barn was
Here's the
here.
barn. I think the barn is.
the barn is right
Oh,
here.
yeah, so that's just your notes right there. So, yeah, this is the
No,
barn.
that's-
Oh, yeah, I see it. I see it.
There was an old barn here that was torn down many years ago.
Gotcha.
That needed to be before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Well, just
current ones. That are in my
But
area.
this is where the barn is now, and these are basically what you have with delineation.
This is where the fill would be.
Correct.
Hmm.
And, you know, like you said,
How far is
this wetland
this to
line
here?
is really the driveway, established driveway, and it really
Yeah.
runs straight out, so I don't know how that wetland line got originally determined. And there's the other wetland line is over here.
Right. The push again, and that was when they did the kitchen, or the other side. They came up against that one, and now they're coming up against the other side.
So this plan was created for the septic repair that they did.
Where's the septic system back here?
So
I don't remember where it was, a mountain.
Is it pretty hot?
I remember where the
It's
septic system.
overgrown. I mean, it seems, I don't want to say wetland plants, but it seems wet. I mean, it's a depression. It just definitely drops off, and then there's a gravel driveway. Not even. I mean, it's a poorly maintained driveway, and then it's back right into the wetlands right there. But it looks like that on the driveway kind of curves around as far as the growth goes. It might not be that bad. I mean, that's why I'd be interested to see where the buffer zone actually lies, off of what the current wetland border is, whether it's established on this or what they say the border is, to see what the offset is and how it actually goes into that. God, it feels like it curves, but it doesn't, right? The other driveway comes down, and everything almost seems like it drains and comes back,
Yep.
but not back behind the barn. I can't.
Yeah, it's not immediate behind the barn,
Right,
because you
it's down
have
more often.
the stand of trees there that we were talking about at the edge of the septic, and then it drops down and levels, and then it drops down.
Yeah.
I do think you're right to be concerned about what goes in back here. You know, but that's my only, I'd have to agree with Rebecca on that.
So is that depression natural, or is that something that somebody has dug out behind the barn to give them access under the barn?
I would say it's natural, probably from when they put in that cart path.
There's no access out the back of the barn now. It drops. And they'd like to be able to have their animals come out, their goats or chickens or whatever.
Right. Goats and chickens are good.
Yeah, that's what they're
We'll take
doing.
another look at
There
it.
was a friendly cat there too.
Yes.
We'll take another look at it.
So this,
Yeah, I don't mind. If you're, you on site these days?
It's touch and go depending on
Yeah,
what's going on. I mean,
I don't want to, we've already asked you to come back 3 times.
I'm available.
Go look.
I'm available. It's not a problem.
You can just sneak over there and take a look at it.
Yeah, whatever.
on what was submitted for this evening though, it only talks about and it's requesting a determination for the construction of a single-story in-law apartment with attached 2-car garage. So do we wanna focus on that, and then if, we wanna have a second site visit, because it sounds like the commission wants to know about whether that barn work falls within the 100-foot adjacent upland resource area, buffer zone, and the distance from the wetland resource area. Would that be beneficial to break it up like that?
If it helps get the permit to be approved, right now it's kind of in a holding pattern, and I was hoping to try and talk to the building inspector tonight to
Does
see.
the building permit talk about the barn? The one that you've submitted on Viewpoint, or no?
No,
Okay.
I'm not here to demo the barn.
No, but I mean work behind the barn, it doesn't state anything about that.
No.
Okay. So I think that may be the best.
Right, I agree.
To stick to this.
Yeah.
But to get you moving on this, on the
Yeah,
project, you
yeah.
need to get moving on it.
I have excess fill,
Yeah.
and
Well, and that
I thought
that's
that-
going to be, generally
it
speaking,
would be-
no stockpiling of materials, no fill in the buffer zone.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's why I brought up the stockpiling originally, is where we're going to stockpile it, in the front of the house, on the driveway. Anything that's outside the buffer zone, basically, we'll put that in the RDA. And that's kind of where I got that question originally.
so the, in planning the excavation,
Right.
you're either gonna put it in the truck and
Move
take
it
it
off
off site,
Mm-hmm.
or
And the
Yeah.
driveway, if it's big enough, that's right.
Well, no, they're talking about fill coming out.
Oh.
What you get when you have to
When
excavate
you start
the
excavating the
foundation.
foundation, yeah.
Right.
So they said, well, we'd like to add the fill here where it's,
Yeah.
it drops
Well,
down.
that's
And
what
so there's what we run into. Like if
So,
we'd either have to put that whole part in this plan,
Or do
or
something.
this plan as it stands, we'll have to say something about the fill not going on site or being stockpiled off site or being stockpiled outside the buffer zone, which I guess leaves you the opportunity, if you're able to stockpile it like in your front yard until you're able to file for something and then move it.
well, there's room right here in the back.
Yeah, I mean that's fine too. Like I guess what I'm saying is you don't necessarily have to take it off site, but you can't really put it in the buffer zone area until you file and ask permission, basically.
Right, and that's why I was saying if you add it onto the plans, you have the details related to it on the plans, it would be a continuation, and the commission could include that within their decision and determination, but that would continue you to another meeting.
Would that hold up this permit?
Yep.
Okay, well, personally, I'm not sure you want to hold up the permit any longer. You want to get going on that job. You have those, the bulldozers and the owners are ready to go. Everybody's jumping at the bit. So I would suggest that you don't put it in the buffer. We'll put the fill in the buffer zone, like Brian says.
Yeah.
So we can get this permit going, so you
Okay.
and your clients can get moving along.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Yeah, come back for
I-
the
you know, I- 'cause I'm-
at a different time.
Okay,
I'm
so-
happy with what you got going on there, and
So I'll just file the information tomorrow, and then we'll meet on that again.
yeah,
That-
Under the same one, or you're filing additional, or do you,
However you want me to do it.
that's up to the commission.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, I'll stockpile it for now, and we'll see how the timing
it's up
goes.
to you. If you want us to vote on this tonight,
Yeah.
it's going to be just nothing to do with the barn. So
Right.
we're going to have to put in the order that
Okay.
everything needs to be stockpiled outside the buffer zone.
Yeah.
Whether it's taken off site or on site, it just has to be outside the buffer zone, which is fine. And then you'd have to file again if you want to do work out there behind the barn, a second file.
Okay.
Or we could vote on this tonight, and again, like I said, it would just be for that front part, but we could probably approve it tonight. I don't think
I
there's
agree.
any major outstanding
Okay.
I agree.
issues. It would just mean you'd have to come back to do work on the barn, buy something separate. Your other option is, if you want, we can continue it. We meet again in 2 weeks. You can add it all onto this one and have it as one plan with everything. But then it's waiting 2 weeks for us to approve it. Does that make sense?
getting chilly.
Yeah, no,
And so it's up to you. I'm fine with either. I can wait 2 weeks and see the full plan. If you want us just to vote on that one part of the plan,
No,
I'm
it's just-
happy.
let's just vote on the one plan, and
Okay.
I'll make another submission.
That makes sense.
So we're stockpiling outside of the adjacent upland resource area and 100-foot buffer. And then requesting straw wattles for erosion
Well,
control.
that's what the one I was going to ask you. I mean, it would seem like a straw wattle would be fine, just looking at the topography, but I don't know if you think that's sufficient. It's probably the least expensive way to do it. Is that?
Cost isn't really.
Well, no,
But yeah,
cost isn't
yeah.
it, but I was going to say,
You're more experienced in this.
Well-
usually it's an either or thing, whichever one you want it to, but usually if you can get away with the wattles, that's the way
I
to
mean,
go.
I think I mentioned it before, there's, not knowing where the hay comes from, you might get a invasive species. So
Well, we actually ask for straw wattles.
that's why most
Yeah.
commissions today
Yeah.
ask for the straw wattles.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
fine with that too.
Okay.
It doesn't look like there's gonna be a lot of water running down and over those things, so
No.
it's gonna be,
right, I mean, there's a lot of grass.
yeah,
It's gonna
there's a
be-
lot of stuff.
Yeah, they'll,
As long as the stock, when you go to dig a hole for the foundation, doesn't change the way the water is. I'm not,
yeah, they'll actually
The two conditions.
take the water in
Yeah.
and recharge it to the ground and be a big hole.
Big idea. It's a big hole.
Okay. Any additional questions?
Nope.
All right. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we close the public hearing for 269 Harvard Road.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. I'd like to make a motion that we have a -3 determination for the project at 269 Harvard Road. For for the project as submitted with the following two conditions, that straw wattles be in place before work begins, be in place and approved by the conservation administrator before work begins. That any stockpiling of materials or items removed from the site be placed outside of the adjacent upland resource area or the buffer zone.
And how do you define the buffer zone?
100-foot buffer. So
On
100
the-
feet from the
Right,
wetland
yeah,
resource
was
area.
it, what was shown on the map there, that you were talking, you were kinda unsure of?
Well, it's
Right behind the house.
it's gonna be directly behind the house, and I think we're well over 100 feet where the stockpile's gonna be.
Yeah, it basically cut diagonal from the house, if I can remember. So it's
Yeah.
and in the driveway is generally considered fine. It's just trying to keep it out of
I had
those
about
outlying
every
areas.
stockpile.
Yeah, you don't wanna, with a paved driveway, you don't wanna put material in.
No,
it.
no, but yeah, but I would just say like your different areas just to keep it out of that back corner.
Yeah.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now we can sign.
Yep.
If you want.
I'm gonna sign it before we
Only
leave.
if you want.
I'm gonna get to go first. Question,
So
so
you
you might
had
have to sign my
information
name.
before 11 o'clock tomorrow, is that how we had to do it?
Next meeting, yes. However,
However,
I'm at a training all day tomorrow. So, if you drop it off, have the town clerk stamp it.
Because you contact the paper.
Yep, so I can do that remotely, but I can't
Okay.
accept the.
All right. So I'll put that over tomorrow. And, I'm assuming that I can take the back pad, the back deck off. Your
Yep.
Oh yeah.
no
yeah,
work is
yeah.
relative to excavation.
Yeah.
Okay.
it's all yours.
Just wanna.
Yeah, no, anything goes, and again, anything goes in that original narrative where it says building the in-law
Take the roof
apartment
off,
in this
otherwise it
area.
doesn't end up in the resource area.
But, you know, taking that deck off is part of building the in-law apartment, excavating is part of building the in-law apartment, but anything behind the shed, or removal of the shed is not part of building the in-law apartment.
Anybody coming after me with.
Oh, yeah, we're nasty like that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Yeah.
Need some help over here?
Take one.
Yeah.
No charge.
Whatever you want. That too.
Okay. Next up, we have a series of votes.
Yes.
Hate to say,
We
what are
don't
our
open
options? No, I know we don't,
So
we've
the
already
options
closed.
are under notice of intent. Right, we'll go first through the notice of intent. You have the options to approve, deny, conditionally approve. And that's it. So you can approve the following conditions which are necessary in accordance with the performance standards set forth in the wetlands regulations. The commission orders that all work shall be performed in accordance with the notice of intent referenced above, which will be whichever one you're addressing. The following general conditions and any other special conditions attached to this order to the extent the following conditions modify or differ from the plan specifications or other proposals submitted with the notice of intent, these conditions shall control. Or you can deny the proposed work cannot be conditioned to meet the performance standards set forth in the wetland regulations. Therefore, work on this project may not go forward unless and until a new notice of intent is submitted, which provides measures which are adequate to protect interests of the act, and a final order of conditions is issued. A description of the performance standards which the proposed work cannot meet is attached to this order. Or the information submitted by the applicant is not sufficient to describe the site, the work, or the effect of the work on the interests identified in the Wetlands Protection Act. Therefore, on this project may not go forward unless and until a revised notice of intent is submitted, which provides sufficient information and includes measures which are adequate to protect the interests of the Act, and a final order of conditions is issued. A description of the specific information which is lacking and why is it necessary is attached to this order, per 310 CMR 10.056C. And that's it. Those are your options.
Okay. Can we discuss, or do we just vote? Or we just open for motions?
You have to vote.
All right. We'll happily make a motion in a minute. Does anybody want to make a motion? Okay. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we deny the notice of intent for 21 Century Mill Road proposed improvements to existing driveway, and the condition that we have not received. I'm trying to think of your exact wording for incomplete information. It was basically the second reason for denial.
The information submitted by the applicant is not sufficient to describe the site, the work, or the effect of the work on the interests identified in the Wetlands Protection Act. I would also add in our local wetlands bylaw to cover that as well. Therefore, work on this project may not go forward unless and until a revised notice of intent is submitted, which provides that sufficient information includes measures which are adequate to protect the interests of the Act.
So I would like to make a motion that we deny the notice of intent for 21 Century Mill Road based upon the I'll come to you in a second. No, I was going to say based upon what you just read, basically based upon the information just provided regarding the
Adequate measures to protect the interests of the Wetlands Protection Act.
under both the Wetlands Protection Act and under our local bylaw. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. All those in
I
favor?
would say
Oh,
the drafted findings.
what's that?
In the drafted findings, I would include to that. Because that lists, that's what I've drafted, is the resource areas, relevancy.
Okay. So it's a motion to deny based upon the information we went through previously,
Yeah.
under both the Wetlands Protection Act and the local bylaw, and
Establishing the findings as drafted.
establishing the findings as drafted. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Aye. All right. All right. Next up, I'd like to make a like to make a motion that we deny the notice of intent for Lot 3 Century Mill Road under the condition that we have not received significant the appropriate information as we had.
You signed the 21 Century Mill first.
As discussed before, under both the Wetland bylaw, under both the Wetland Protection Act and the local bylaw, and in a second,
We'll leave that for him.
and with the Rebecca, I'm going to need help with wording again. I'm sorry, I'm doing the second one.
So lot 3.
Yep, but it's the same thing at the end.
Yep.
Establish the findings as drafted.
And establish the findings as drafted. Thank you. Here a second.
Oh, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. I'd like to make a motion that we deny the notice of intent for Lot 4 Century Mill Road under both the Wetland Protection Act and under the local bylaws, on the condition that we have found insufficient information, as was discussed earlier, And that, go ahead, Bill, please help me.
Establish the findings as drafted.
We establish the findings as currently drafted. Do I hear a second?
Aye, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That back to Rebecca. So for the RDA, is that a different option?
Yes, bear with me for a moment.
Yeah.
And then we did not forward this down as well. So this one, the commission can make positive or negative determination. Positive, do you want me to review them?
If you could review the positive determinations quickly.
So positive determination establishes either that, so we're not talking about boundary delineations. The request for determination was inquiring about. Whether the work depicted on plans referenced below is subject to the Wetlands Protection Act, or whether the area or work depicted on plans referenced below is subject to jurisdiction of any municipal wetlands or ordinance or bylaw of. So the positive determinations related to that would be that the work described on reference, positive again, the work described on reference plans and documents is within the area subject to protection under the Act and will remove, fill, dredge, or alter that area. Therefore, said work requires the filing of a notice of intent. The work described on reference plans and documents is within the buffer zone and will alter an area subject to protection under the Act. Therefore, said work requires the filing of the notice of intent or ANRAD simplified review if work is limited to the buffer zone. So the buffer zone specific. Other option for positive determination, the area and or work described on reference plans and documents is subject to review and approval by the Town of Bolton Conservation Commission pursuant to the following municipal wetland ordinance or bylaw, Town of Bolton Wetland Bylaw, Chapter 233. The following determination the following area and or work, if any, is subject to a municipal ordinance or bylaw, but not subject to the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. And then, if a notice of intent is filed for the work in riverfront area, reference plans and documents, which includes all or part of work describing request, the applicant must consider the following alternatives. And that lists the different alternatives. For negative determination related to what's been requested, the work described in the request is within the buffer zone as defined in the regulations, but will not alter an area subject to protection under the Act. Therefore, said work does not require the filing of a notice of intent subject to the following conditions, if any. The work described in the request is not within an area subject to protection under the Act, including the buffer zone, Therefore, said work does not require the filing of notice of intent unless and until said work alters an area subject to protection under the act. Or, again, these are negative.
Yep.
The area described in the request is subject to protection under the act since the work described therein meets the requirements for the following exemption as specified in the act and regulations. No notice of intent is required. This is exempt activity. Lastly, negative determination, the area and or work described in the request is not subject to review and approval by the Town of Bolton Conservation Commission pursuant to municipal wetlands ordinance or bylaw, the Bolton Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 233.
Can I see that for me? Anybody want to make a motion?
Or the motion first.
You brought lot four.
Just lot four, I think.
This is lot 4.
No, I have
No,
lot four.
this is
So it's the,
Lot 2.
lot 2.
motion. He's,
I'm trying to think which number. Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we have a positive 3 determination for the request for determination of applicability for Lot 2 Century Mill Road, that the work described on the reference plans and documents is within an area subject to protection under the Act and will remove, fill, dredge, or alter that area. Therefore, said work requires the filing of a notice of intent. Here, a second.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You need to pass that.
Yeah.
Sign it.
No, I mean, you can.
I was just saying, I wasn't sure you need to check off something first.
It's
Do we have final plans to the DPW?
Yes, we were given the final plans. The only thing we were waiting for, which they submitted electronically previously, was the stormwater report. So we do have that. So we will be able to reference that and it's drafted within the order of conditions.
So it's the stormwater management, or is it the stormwater effect plan, stormwater management?
Yeah,
Plan.
and the drainage report as well. So we received those two documents.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I really can't ask you, did you have any questions or issues with this? It seems
I did not.
there are standards.
It's just reflective of what it already shows on the plans and what we had talked about with them.
I was gonna say, we got through last time. Do you have a draft of that? I'm sorry, I want to look at my negative determinations again. I can never remember, is it a 5?
So this is the notice, it's a notice, both of them for Spectacle Hill Road and South Bolton Road
What am I saying?
are
Yeah, no, I'm
Consent.
sorry, I had the RDA stuck in my head.
That's okay. So
All right.
this is Spectacle Hill Road, and we have those same options now.
Yeah. All right. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the notice of intent for the replacement of one road culvert along with proposed catch basins, manholes, and associated grading located off Spectacle Hill Road and South Bolton Road as drafted and submitted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And while we're there, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the notice of intent for the Department of Public Works for the proposed catch basin and discharge pipe to improve drainage on South Bolton Road as currently drafted and submitted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
while you're signing, two quick things, one of which I mentioned during the presentation was that we have an agricultural preservation restriction workshop. It's going to be held at Chartner Farm on October 19th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And it's just talking about what works for some people, what doesn't work for some people, what they liked, didn't like about the process of getting an APR on their property, in addition to what it entails, and then what the benefits are. And then the second item is our lovely volunteers from our Trails Committee will be holding another work party on October 19th and October 20th. I will be there for the October 19th, for the afternoon anyways, work party. And
Those
they were,
weekend days?
yes,
I thought you had, or you're gonna be there in the
in the
afternoon.
afternoon. So after the workshop. But they were inquiring whether or not they could possibly have a sort of dinner cookout afterwards. And I need to make sure that if we're required to get a permit from the fire department, I just want to make sure that that's something that the commission sees as appropriate. It would be bringing a grill or a single burner, gas burner to cook, whether it be hot dogs or whatever food they would like, and then picnic tables and everything would be cleaned up by the end of the day.
I would see.
I have to recuse
Be
myself.
appropriate.
And where
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
I have to recuse myself,
At
huh?
Bauer Springs.
Power Springs.
goats are welcome at that?
Goats may be
Yes,
welcome.
actually.
They
please
taste
let me
good.
know.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
They
great.
end up on the grill.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, you gotta let them eat first, and then.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that's
So-
all.
Other than I know some of these people that'll be around the open flame, which scares me a little bit. Other than that, I think
Is
it's
there a lot of noise, like chainsaws and weed whackers? And
Yeah,
Probably.
probably. So the part two
these
question.
I
these
think
3
that-
or 4 that I'm going to bring are really the.
I think the grill would scare the goats more than the chainsaws, to be
You
honest
need
with
to
you.
be eating everything you have. You won't be able to keep them away from your plates, especially paper plates.
So I guess that's part two.
Need a
that I've
special
been
permit
trying
for
to get
goats,
out
I
of Bill
suppose.
as well is the commission okay with allowing goats to potentially be munching on poison ivy and things during that work party?
It would seem like an
The-
ideal.
One goat on a
an
leash.
ideal way to deal
Same
with the
rules
problem,
apply as dogs, right? One leash, one, you know.
yeah. What does the state say for volunteer hours for animals?
Maybe I should.
I
Well,
don't
but
know.
right to the
That
animals
is
yet.
skill specific.
Yeah, it really is.
23 bucks an
Yeah,
hour,
that's
folks.
That's free labor all day long. We'll take those goats.
But one goat per leash. One,
I'll get leashes for a couple of goats.
yeah, so you have
It
leash.
might be the best way to keep them
Temporary
under
fencing
control.
works too.
Do you need a roll call vote? Is it fine under just a discussion? Because you
I
probably have
think
to
it's
recuse
fine
himself
just to
anyway.
I'm
it's the
actually-
whole,
I
yeah.
think-
So
But
everyone's okay with.
I was gonna say, Kip. All right. Yeah.
And then lastly, we did get a few mail items before we brush up on those. Was everyone okay with the minutes?
That's
Yes,
That-
I found no typos.
Do we have a quorum from who was here at the last meeting? I don't think
I
so.
don't think so.
We don't
I
have
think-
a quorum.
No, we
Okay.
don't,
Was it-
because
yeah, no, they'll just.
Minutes on.
Emily's
So
not here.
we will roll these ones over. But I didn't, of course, we have an issue. I thought they were fine.
No typos.
I'm sure we can find a typo.
So our few mail items include,
So wait, I think
I have one more
MACC
thing for
has
you
a
to sign.
meeting on the 19th as well.
so the commission will be signing the letter that they already approved and authorized at their last meeting to Chairman Creighton, which is our Senate Chair, regarding the bill number 810, which is talking about an amendment to our lovely Chapter 40B of Massachusetts General Law specific to low and moderate income housing within proximity to environmentally sensitive areas and wetlands. It's the same thing, just formatted in
What's your name?
Brian Boyle. I actually had a question about
No,
that.
what?
Yes.
What's your
Please,
name?
yeah.
Brian Boyle.
Okay, because I didn't,
chair.
I just
Yes.
wanted to, I don't wanted to just know who.
Oh, yeah.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. Bordle, B-O-R-D-L-E.
Boy.
Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E. Thanks.
The other Brian.
Yeah, I was gonna say, she remembered her first name. Go ahead.
So I noticed that one of our senators was a sponsor, I think, of the bill.
Yep.
And it's in the Joint Committee on Housing. Do we know whether Kate Hogan is supporting the bill or any other?
She has been approached by residents, one of which sent us the same letter that was given to her and a few other residents, so I believe she's aware, or I know she's aware of it. I don't have a formal for or against it.
Yeah.
I haven't asked that question yet, but I can double check with Dawn and
It's not.
see.
I was just curious.
No, it's a good question. Any other questions?
Any questions?
She was very aware of it though, because during her last office hours, I believe quite a few residents met with her that I was
A
aware of.
number of
anyways.
people, I believe. Yeah.
Have you heard people from around town that are opposed, or everyone's in support?
I haven't, it's one of those things where we may not hear from people who are opposed, or it's just some people who feel indifferent about it, but we're certainly hearing from the people that are for it. So thus far, I haven't heard anyone opposed, but I think there's a majority of residents or individuals that either just don't know about it or just simply are indifferent.
And to be clear too, with this letter, it's honestly just asking the Senate President to bring it up for a vote. It doesn't, I mean, even though we do support the bill and we would like to see the bill get enacted, it basically just says this is an important bill, can you just bring it up for a vote? That's all we're really encouraging.
You wanna read the letter?
I know, it's right, I was gonna say, yeah.
You've read it, right?
Yeah.
So we received a letter from one of our residents, just again describing her own rendition of this letter and its importance to protect the resources that we have here in the town of Bolton and within the watershed of Still River specifically is what her letter focuses on. The Conservation Commission's letter and the Board of Selectmen's letter does not focus on a specific property or project, it's just talking about in general, so that it can be supportive of things in other towns as well. So thank you for signing that. And two other mail items quickly. One is our lovely memberships for MACC.
Oh, the new cards.
We got new cards.
I knew I came tonight for a reason.
Do you know your password?
I don't.
Do you know what they?
I will now. Oh, for the online? Yeah.
And then
Yep.
there are a new list of trainings. So the fundamental unit trainings are up for the next few months. There is a fall conference on October 19th in Devon's, and Environmental Service Award nominations. And then you have your lovely agenda of the fall conference. And thanking us for our memberships. If anyone has a question about what your membership provides you and what the dues provide you with, that is also listed here. It's also listed on the website if you've visited their website. And lastly, they've also provided each Conservation Commission with a copy of their new
Oh, the one.
Document.
Zone guidebook, right? Or,
yes,
Yeah.
Wetlands Buffer Zone Guidebook,
yeah.
which is great.
You can download that too.
We,
That's okay.
the last item we received is a notice of proposed cable replacement. This letter is to notify the Bolton Conservation Commission that Massachusetts Electric Company, National Grid, is proposing to conduct public utility replacement activities consisting of replacing the direct buried cable with cable conduit from P37 to pad 10 and install 2 pole boxes within Nashwauk Estates, Nashway Road in Bolton, Mass. The project will install approximately 1,600 linear feet of replacement conduit in Nashwauk Estates. Please refer to the attached site location map, which is here, to show the project route and proposed work. The project is exempt from the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act, which we're aware of, Chapter 131, Section 40, under 310 CMR 1002 2A2, and also the Town of Bolton Wetlands Protection Bylaw 1.18. Supposed to be Chapter 233, Section 1.18. as the work consists of activities conducted to maintain, repair, or replace, but not substantially enlarge an existing and lawfully located structure used to provide electric service to the public, so public works and public services. Portions of the project route are located within the 100-foot buffer zone of bordering vegetated wetlands. All work will be contained within previously disturbed or paved landscaped areas. We anticipate no adverse impacts to any wetland resource areas as a result of this project. Protective measures and best management practices consisting of staked straw wattles and catch basin silt sacks will be implemented as needed. So the silt sacks will be in existing catch basins, to clarify. Temporarily disturbed areas will be stabilized and restored to pre-construction conditions to the extent practicable, and all construction materials, vehicles, and non-biodegradable sediment controls will be removed from the site upon completion of work. And then a copy of the right-of-way access is available upon request.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's concerned about that. So in the past, for different utility maintenance items, we have required them to file RDAs, where this already provides all the information that would be provided in RDA. I don't know if that's necessary.
No, and I was going to say, there's very little we can ask them to do, and they're already hitting the erosion controls, and
Right.
they're hitting everything we would have asked anyways. And they'll do it regardless.
Well, if
We
we
really
no matter what
can't
we say.
stop them, we can just ask them to do it in nice ways, which they seem
So
like
this
they're
is
already doing.
Bolton Orchard right here, 117. Yep, it's 117.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, for Nashway.
Yeah, this is Nashway Road here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I think that's still the main road there.
Yeah. Where is Bolton?
I thought that was Bolton Orchard's right there.
Just starting to hope.
No, that's still River Road.
Is it
running
Ash?
that way.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's that.
Can we see?
So it's basically, sure, no problem, I share.
Flats.
Yeah,
Right.
right. It's here.
So
Yeah.
it's-
Nashway Road.
Yeah.
Bolton.
It's
Bolton
here.
Orchard's
Right,
still
right.
right.
This is 110.
Yeah,
Right.
it's 110,
Nashway.
sorry.
Yeah. No.
it's right on the corner where that lot
Yeah.
31 was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
regardless,
those neighborhoods.
nice neighborhoods. Come on. What you there for? Well, very nice of them to let us know. Any other outstanding
Are there
issues?
any erosion controls going on that have to do with this public works things at Wattaquatic and Main Street? Are we worried about that?
Because it's within the right of way and the resource areas are beyond it. Currently, the work that they're doing is just to replace
Yeah, no. But I was just wondering, because that
So,
stream
no.
sort of,
So it's to
where
replace
it
what?
goes, the poles.
Okay.
So when they do the sidewalks, they will,
have to do something.
We'll file. Yeah.
they'll file.
I was just sort of wondering, I saw the barrels there, and I knew they weren't,
Mm-hmm.
just curious, that's all. Did you see the one we did over here, where they were gonna put do the diverting the river, the brook that goes through there?
Yes,
And over
yes,
there,
yes.
So looked at the engineering on that.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, they put the
barrier.
pipes in to keep the flow going so they can go over with the trucks to do a tree removal.
Right.
And then they'll come back over, and when they come back over, they'll slow down.
Put back. Remember that?
I do remember that. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's why it'd be fun to see that.
Yeah. It's like field trip.
I mean, it's pretty dry right now too.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they're trying to do it now before we see any significant rainstorms.
Yeah, it's dry. The pond is almost dry. It's really dry now. The pond behind my house is almost dry. It's like two big puddles right now.
Anything else outstanding? Audience, questions, comments? Go ahead, please.
So I'm not exactly sure where things stand with regard to 21st Century Mill.
So it's closed and all the permit was denied, basically.
And can this be revived at some point if he
It
wants to
can-
come forward and submit more
He has
information?
10 days to appeal
Mhm.
the commission's decision. The appeal for the bylaw would go to Superior Court. The appeal to the Wetlands Protection Act, where conditions would go to DEP.
Mhm.
The DEP portion is out of our hands at that point. They have the ability to, they being the DEP, have the ability to issue a superseding order if they feel the commission's findings and decision wasn't appropriate. But regarding if he can come back with new information, so that, those permits are all closed out. Those public hearings are all closed out. But
The ones we've already had.
the ones
are
we've
closed
already
out.
had. But he can bring forth the same exact application and provide that information that the commission had been asking for many years under a new permit. And then the commission would consider it as a new permit, just with the information that's provided.
And if that eventuality came to be, would you send abutters letters?
So yes, so it would be a complete new filing. He would have to advertise in the paper, notify abutters, the whole
Okay.
permitting process starts over. It's a new project at that point.
I just wouldn't want to have this slip through the cracks. So, has any punitive action been taken for this excavation?
It's included within the findings.
It is, okay. And I understood the first 3 votes that you took, everything was deny.
Yeah.
But on lot number 2, that I found that very confusing.
Yes.
And I think
Everybody
So
does,
upon-
yeah.
Upon, for an RDA or a request for determination of applicability, the result is a positive or a negative determination made by the commission. A positive determination means either you can't do it, or if you still want to do it, you need to file a notice of intent, provide more information on what you're trying to do, or what the site consists of currently, what the conditions are. If it's a negative determination, it means you're allowed to do the work, and the commission may impose a couple conditions under that negative determination, depending on which negative determination or positive determination is made.
Okay. Good. Okay, one last question.
Please.
Doesn't
Please.
relate to this.
Sure.
So Hudson Power hired, the tree guys to come down
Yes.
Hudson Road.
Yeah.
And I can remember years ago that it was sort of a dedicated arborway, like you weren't allowed to cut any trees, going down the
It's
road.
still that.
So, is it because it's a public entity and they can do what they? How's that work?
No, that is a good question for the tree warden. What I can answer regarding the commission's jurisdiction is that they did remove some trees adjacent to a restoration area, which is part of a development whose work is currently still ongoing at this point. So I was notified of that. The commission was then notified during the next public meeting that this had occurred. Right now, it hasn't proven to negatively impact that restoration area, but we're still in the second growing period here, so we'll know by next spring. But we've already spoken, both myself and the tree warden, with Hudson Light and Power and the individual in charge of that entity to ensure that they're responsible for that if it fails regarding the restoration area.
I see. Okay.
I was notified recently of some trees removed on Century Mill Road, which I will be talking to the tree warden about and reviewing that area as well in the event that it's jurisdictional to the commission. But street trees do have to go through the public hearing process. Again, that's a level not within our jurisdiction, but it's within the tree warden's jurisdiction. So there is still that protected resource of the trees along that roadway.
I'm the last person on Hudson Road for Hudson Power. So they literally stopped in the middle of my lot in terms of trimming.
Yeah.
And I was out there.
So trimming is different from tree removal.
Okay.
Just to clarify, so they're allowed to trim because of the power lines, because they're a utility. When it comes to removing the specified removing within jurisdictional areas to the commission, but then removing regarding that certain diameter that's protected by the tree warden's jurisdiction, then it becomes an issue and you have to come to public hearings, etc.
So you live in Bolton, but you get Hudson Power?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh.
But like I said, I'm literally the last person. I have friends that live in Stowe that got some power too. So they're better than National Grid.
But that's beyond our jurisdiction.
Yeah. But they are or doing a lot of work on Century Mill. So
I heard of that this morning. And unfortunately with all of this I did not have time to drive out there, but Thursday I will be.
Thank you very
concerned
much
citizens.
for all of your patience with
Thank
my
you.
questions.
No, no, appreciate the questions.
Thank you.
Any other outstanding issues? Questions, comments? Like to make a motion that we hereby close the October 1st, 2019 meeting of the Bolton Conservation Commission.
Second.
Adjourned.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's 3 out of 4. We're closed.